My name is Marianne Whitaker. I'm 62 years old, and my son tried to take my house while I was still learning how to hold a coffee cup without spilling it. 3 months before the court date, I woke up in a hospital room in Columbus, Ohio, with the right side of my body heavy and strange, like it belonged to someone else. The doctor called it a minor stroke. Minor is a word people use when they're not the one staring at their own hand, begging it to move. My son Blake came in wearing the expression every mother wants to see on her child's face when she's scared, worried, gentle, devoted. He held my left hand and said, "Mom, you scared me." Then he placed a stack of papers on my hospital blanket. "It's just a power of attorney," he said, "so I can help with bills, doctors, insurance. Dad would want me to take care of you." And because I was tired, because I was scared, because Blake was my only child, I signed. For 2 weeks, he was perfect. He brought soup. He checked my medication. He told the neighbors he was stepping up. Then my debit card disappeared. My car keys vanished from the hook by the kitchen door. My doctor's office stopped calling me and started calling him. When I asked why the locks had been changed on my own back door, Blake kissed my forehead and said, "Mom, you're getting confused again." I wasn't confused. I was being erased. The house he wanted was the one my husband Arthur and I bought 31 years ago. The one with pencil marks on the pantry frame showing Blake at 7, 10, and 13. The one with Arthur's roses still climbing the fence out back. Blake called it too much for me. His wife Claire called it wasted potential. A developer called it worth $740,000. Then the court papers arrived. My son had filed for full guardianship, claiming I was mentally incompetent, financially unstable, and no longer safe living alone. At the bottom of the petition was one sentence that made my blood go cold. Sale of residence may be necessary for long-term care. That night, Blake stood in my kitchen and said the words that changed everything. "You're too weak to fight this." I didn't answer him. I waited until he left. Then I opened the steel box my dead husband had hidden in the bedroom closet, the one marked in his handwriting, for the day our son mistakes kindness for weakness. And when the court date arrived, Blake walked in expecting a helpless old woman. He didn't know I had brought Arthur with me. The morning after the stroke, my son Blake sat beside my hospital bed with his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands, like he was the one who had almost lost the ability to speak. I remember watching him through the side rail, the fluorescent lights turning his blonde hair almost white at the crown. He looked older than 38, tired, frightened, human in a way I hadn't seen in years. "Mom," he said, lifting his head, "you can't do this alone anymore." I tried to answer quickly, but the words came out slower than I wanted. That was the first humiliation, not the weakness in my right hand, not the hospital gown slipping off one shoulder, the delay, that tiny pause between what I knew and what my body allowed me to prove. "I'm not alone," I said. Blake gave me a sad smile, the kind people give when they've already decided you don't understand your own situation. "You live alone." There it was, 3 words, soft as cotton, hard as a lock clicking shut. My husband Arthur had been gone 4 years by then. A heart attack in the backyard on a Sunday afternoon right beside the rose trellis he had built because he said a woman deserved flowers she didn't have to ask for. After he died, people kept telling me I should sell the house, move into a condo, simplify my life. They meant well, mostly. But the house was not cluttered to me. It was a record. Every doorway knew us. Every floorboard had held our arguments, our birthdays, our ordinary mornings. Blake knew that. He also knew the house had become valuable. By noon, Claire arrived with a coffee she did not offer me and a leather folder tucked under her arm. My daughter-in-law has always been the kind of woman who can make concern sound like management. She kissed the air near my cheek and looked around the room as if checking whether the hospital had overcharged for the curtains. "You scared everyone," she said. Blake barely slept. Blake reached for my left hand. "We just want to make sure things are handled." Handled. I should have heard the warning in that word. It was the same word Arthur used for gutters and insurance claims and raccoons in the attic. Things got handled. People got loved. But I was tired. My head hurt. My tongue felt too large for my mouth, and my son was looking at me like a boy again. He opened the folder. "It's not a big deal," he said. "Just temporary paperwork. Power of attorney. Medical authorization." banking access in case bills come due while you're recovering. Claire added, "It's standard after something like this." I looked at the papers, then at Blake. "Do I need a lawyer?" The question changed the room. Not loudly, not dramatically, but something passed between Blake and Claire so fast I might have missed it if I hadn't spent 31 years teaching teenagers how to hide cigarettes, forged passes, and lies behind innocent faces. Blake squeezed my fingers. "Mom, come on, it's me." That was how he got me. Not with pressure, not at first, with history. It's me. The baby I rocked through ear infections. The boy whose dinosaur sheets I washed every Friday. The teenager I drove to basketball practice before dawn. The man I once lent $12,000 to when his first renovation business hit a cash flow snag, as he called it then. It's me, so I signed. My signature looked wrong, crooked, thinner than usual, dragged slightly upward because my left hand had never been asked to carry my name before. Blake took the pen from me and covered the papers with his palm, like a dealer sweeping cards off a table. "You did the right thing," he said. At the time, I believed him. The first week after I came home, he was wonderful in ways that made me ashamed for ever doubting him. He stocked the fridge. He put a shower chair in the bathroom. He taped a medication schedule to the cabinet. He called every evening at 7 and asked if I had eaten. The neighbors noticed. Maggie Dawson from next door came over with chicken pot pie and said, "Blake is really stepping up." I smiled because I wanted that to be true. Then small things began moving. My checkbook disappeared from the drawer beside the stove. Blake said he had put it somewhere safer. My mail stopped landing in the brass slot by the front door and began appearing in a neat pile on the kitchen table, already opened. When I asked about it, he said he was sorting medical bills so I wouldn't get overwhelmed. "I've paid bills for 40 years, I told him. "I know," he said gently, "but things are different now." Different. That became the word he used whenever he wanted to take something without calling it taking. My car keys were next. I found the hook empty one morning when I had a physical therapy appointment at 10. Blake was supposed to drive me, but he was late, and I hated being late. I had been a school librarian for 32 years. Bells mattered to me. Schedules mattered. If you start treating time like it belongs only to you, eventually you start treating people that way too. I called him. "Where are my keys?" A pause. "I have them." "Why?" "Because you shouldn't be driving." "My doctor didn't say that." "He will." That sentence sat between us like a stranger. "Blake," I said carefully, "bring my keys back." His voice softened, which I had started to learn was worse than anger. "Mom, this is exactly what worries me. You get fixated, then upset. I'm trying to keep you safe." I looked down at my right hand, curled uselessly in my lap, and for one awful second I wondered if he was right. Maybe I was being difficult. Maybe I was scared and turning that fear into stubbornness. Maybe independence was just another word old people used when they did not want to admit the world had become too heavy. Then I looked at the kitchen counter. My mail was open, my checkbook was gone, my keys were gone, and my son was speaking to me like a problem he had already solved. That was the first day I understood something was wrong. Not wrong with my mind, wrong with his intentions. By the second week, Blake had started using the word "we" in a way that made my house feel smaller. "We decided you shouldn't handle the utilities right now. We moved your medications to a locked box. We think visitors should call Blake first." There was no "we." There was Blake, and there was Claire standing just behind him, quiet enough to look innocent and present enough to guide the knife. The locked medication box appeared on a Tuesday morning. It sat on my kitchen counter, gray plastic with a little combination dial, beside the toaster. Arthur bought me the Christmas before he died. I stared at it for a long time. "My pills are organized," I said. Blake opened the cabinet and took out the orange bottles one by one. "You forgot your blood pressure pill yesterday." "No, I didn't." Claire lifted her phone without looking up. "The app says you didn't check it off." "The app," I said, "is not my memory." Blake gave me that sad smile again. "Mom," just that. One word, but it carried a whole verdict. "Mom, you're confused. Mom, you're difficult. Mom, you're making this harder than it has to be." He locked the box and put the key in his pocket. That afternoon, Maggie came over with a bag of library books because she knew I hated being trapped with daytime television. Maggie Dawson was 70, a retired nurse with silver hair cut blunt at her chin and a habit of seeing too much. She glanced at the medication box, then at the opened mail stacked by the sink. "Blake doing all this?" she asked. "He's helping." Maggie made a small sound that was not agreement. I almost defended him. That was the old reflex, the one mothers develop when their child disappoints them in public. You cover, you explain. You translate selfishness into stress, cruelty into concern, neglect into busyness. But the words dried up before they left my mouth. Instead, I said, "He has my keys." Maggie's face changed. "Did your doctor take your license?" "No." "Did anyone tell you in writing not to drive?" "No." She set the books on the table very carefully. "Then that's not caregiving, Marianne. That's control." I wanted to argue with her. I wanted to say Blake was scared, that he had just watched his mother have a stroke, that people sometimes hold too tightly when they are afraid of losing someone. But even as I formed the excuses, I could hear how tired they sounded. Old excuses have a smell. Dusty, sour, familiar. That night, I tried to log into my bank account and the password failed. I typed it again. Slowly, carefully. The same password I had used for 8 years. Arthur's birthday with an exclamation point at the end because he said any man whose birthday protected a bank account deserved punctuation. Incorrect password. I clicked reset. The recovery email had been changed. The phone number for verification had been changed too. For a few seconds, I simply sat there with the laptop glow on my face, my right hand curled uselessly beside the trackpad. Then I called Blake. He answered on the 4th ring. "Hey, Mom, everything okay? My bank password doesn't work." A pause. Not surprise, calculation. I updated it. "You what?" "I told you, I'm simplifying things. You don't need to be worrying about every little transaction while you're recovering. My bank account is not a little transaction. You're getting upset? I am upset." "Exactly." There it was again. The trick. He would take something, and when I objected, the objection became his proof. I hung up before he could soften his voice and make me doubt the shape of the room I was standing in. The next morning, a white SUV pulled into my driveway. 2 people stepped out with tablets and bright smiles, the kind real estate people wear when they are pretending not to count your windows. Claire walked up behind them with a coffee in one hand and her purse hooked over her elbow. "Oh, good, you're dressed," she said, as if she had expected to find me wandering the yard in slippers. "Who are they?" "Just doing evaluation." "For what?" Claire smiled. "For planning." I looked past her at Blake's truck parked across the street. He had not come inside. That told me more than if he had shouted. The man from Hawthorne Development introduced himself and said the neighborhood was changing fast. He talked about zoning, lot depth, comparable sales. He said my property had remarkable potential. "My husband planted those roses," I said. The man blinked, polite and empty. Claire laughed softly. "She gets sentimental." I turned to her. "I am standing right here." For the first time, Claire's smile slipped. "Yes," she said, "for now." That evening, the court papers arrived. They came in a thick envelope, folded around language that turned my life into a list of deficiencies. Petition for guardianship, alleged cognitive decline, unsafe independent living, financial vulnerability, inability to manage medication, risk of exploitation, risk of exploitation. I laughed when I read that part, not because it was funny, but because sometimes the truth stands so close to a lie that all you can do is make a sound. Blake had signed the petition as my concerned son. Claire had written a supporting statement. My missing keys were listed as voluntarily surrendered. My locked medication box was described as necessary due to repeated missed doses. The changed bank password was protective oversight. Every theft had been renamed care. Then I reached the final page. Under proposed future needs, my son had checked a box beside residential care planning. Beneath it, in a neat paragraph, he had written that sale of my current residence might be necessary to fund long-term support. There it was, not hidden anymore, not entirely. The house, Arthur's roses, Blake's pencil marks, my kitchen, my stairs, the pantry door where his little body had once leaned while I marked each year in black ink. All of it reduced to an asset Blake could liquidate if he could first convince a judge that I had become too weak to own my own life. I folded the papers back into the envelope, but my hands were steadier than I expected. For the first time since the stroke, I did not feel fragile. I felt awake. I called Blake the next morning and asked him to come over alone. He came with Claire. That should have told me everything. She walked in behind him wearing a cream-colored coat I had once complimented at Thanksgiving, and for one strange second I remembered handing her a pie plate in that same kitchen, telling myself my son had chosen well because Claire wrote thank-you notes and always knew which wine to bring. Some people are very good at manners. It can take years to understand manners are not the same as kindness. Blake set his keys on my counter like he owned the place. "You got the papers," he said. Not a question. I was sitting at the kitchen table with the envelope in front of me. My right hand rested in my lap, heavy and stubborn. My left hand lay flat over the petition, holding it still. "I did," he sighed before I said anything else. A long, practiced sigh. The kind a parent uses with a difficult child. "Mom, I know it looks scary. It looks dishonest." Claire's eyebrows lifted. Blake pulled out the chair across from me and sat down slowly. "That's not fair." "No," I said. "What isn't fair is my son telling a court I can't manage my medication when he locked my medication away from me. I did that for your safety. You changed my bank password for your safety. You took my car keys for your safety. You brought strangers into my home to value it without asking me." He looked away then, only for half a second, but I saw it, a crack in the performance. Claire stepped forward. "Marianne, nobody's trying to hurt you, but you have to be realistic. You had a stroke. You live alone. This house has stairs, maintenance bills, property tax. Blake is trying to make sure you don't end up in a crisis." I turned to her. "And Hawthorne Development? Are they part of my safety plan too?" The room went still. Blake's jaw tightened. Claire looked at him, and there it was again, that silent language between them, the one I had mistaken for partnership. Now I understood it was strategy. "Mom," Blake said, "the house is too much for you. The house is mine. It's an asset. It is my home. It's a structure sitting on land worth more than you understand." I stared at him. I had changed his diapers on this floor. I had held cold washcloths to his forehead at this table. I had stayed up until 2 in the morning, helping him build a model of the solar system that he forgot to mention until the night before it was due. I had sold my mother's bracelet to help him make payroll the first time his business nearly collapsed. And now my kitchen was a structure. My memories were land value. Arthur's roses were wasted potential. I asked him quietly, "How much do you owe?" His face went blank. Claire answered too quickly, "That is not relevant." "It is if my house is the solution." Blake stood. The chair legs scraped the floor, harsh and ugly. "This is exactly why we need the court involved. You don't understand what's best anymore." "I understand you're trying to sell my home. I'm trying to keep you alive." "No," I said. "You're trying to keep yourself afloat." That was when the last of the gentle sun disappeared. He leaned over the table, both hands planted on the wood Arthur had sanded and refinished after Blake spilled purple paint on it at 9 years old. "You think you can stop this?" he said. His voice was low, not loud. That made it worse. I did not answer. "You can barely get from the bedroom to the kitchen without that cane. You can't drive. You can't even sign your own name right now without it looking like a child wrote it." Claire said, "Blake," but she did not sound shocked. She sounded like someone reminding him not to say the plan out loud. He looked me straight in the face. "You're too weak to fight this." There it was. Not concern, not fear, not love twisted by panic, the truth. For a moment I heard nothing but the refrigerator humming and the faint tick of the old wall clock above the pantry. My eyes moved, without meaning to the pencil marks on the door frame beside it. Blake, age 7, Blake, age 10, Blake, age 13, marked each one with pride, thinking height meant growth. I know better now. Sometimes children get taller and still remain small in every place that matters. I folded the court papers once, then again, and placed them back in the envelope. "You should leave," I said. Blake laughed once, sharp and humorless. That's it. You're not even going to argue." I looked up at him. "No." That unsettled him more than yelling would have. I could see it. He had come prepared for tears, anger, confusion. He had not prepared for a quiet mother putting the papers away like evidence. Claire touched his arm. "Come on, let her cool down." At the door, Blake turned back. "By the time the court understands anything, Mom, this will already be handled." Handled. There was that word again. After they left, I sat in the kitchen until the light changed across the floor. I did not cry right away. Crying would have been too simple. What I felt was older than sadness. It was the exhaustion of finally seeing what I had spent years refusing to name. My son did not think I was weak because of the stroke. He thought I was weak because I had loved him without keeping receipts. That night, I walked slowly to the bedroom closet and pulled down the steel box Arthur had kept on the top shelf. It was heavier than I remembered. Blue-gray, scratched along the edges, with a strip of masking tape across the lid in his handwriting. For the day our son mistakes kindness for weakness. My knees nearly gave out before the lock did. Inside was a folder, a small stack of documents, and a sealed envelope with my name on it. Marianne. I opened it with my left hand. The first line was enough to break me. My love, if you are reading this, then Blake has finally asked for more than money. I sat on the edge of our bed, Arthur's letter trembling in my hand, and for the first time since the stroke, I let myself cry. Not because I was defeated, because I realized my husband had known, and because, even from the grave, he had left me a way to stand. Arthur's letter was 3 pages long. I read it once on the edge of our bed, then again at the kitchen table, then a third time with the folder spread open in front of me like a map out of a burning house. He had written it 6 months before he died. His handwriting was thinner than it used to be, the loops less confident, but the voice was entirely his. Blake is our son, he wrote. I love him, but love does not require blindness. He has asked me twice to put the house in his name. He called it estate planning. He called it tax protection. He called it simplifying things for you. I called Harold Bennett. Harold Bennett had been Arthur's attorney for 22 years, a careful man with silver eyebrows and a voice like old paper. I remembered him from the funeral. He had pressed both my hands between his and told me Arthur had made arrangements. I was too numb then to ask what that meant. Now I knew. Inside the steel box was a copy of the Whitaker family trust, a deed transfer into the trust, a list of accounts Arthur had protected, and a handwritten note with one name circled twice. Nina Alvarez, elder law, guardianship defense. Under her name Arthur had written, if Blake ever tries to make your independence look like danger, call her first. Do not call him. I sat for a long time with my left hand over that sentence. Do not call him. For 38 years, Blake had been the person I called. When he was little, he called me for monsters, fevers, lost shoes, nightmares. When he became a man, somehow the direction changed, but the need did not. He called me for short loans, emotional rescues, forgotten birthdays, failed contracts, and emergencies that always seemed to arrive at the end of a billing cycle. Arthur had seen what I refused to name. The next morning I called Nina Alvarez. Her assistant put me through after I said Arthur Whitaker's name. Nina's voice was brisk but kind, the voice of a woman who did not waste sympathy when action was more useful. Mrs. Whitaker, I'm sorry we're speaking under these circumstances, she said. Do you understand what your son has filed? Yes, I said. My voice still moved slower than my mind, but I forced each word into place. He wants the court to believe my body and my judgment failed at the same time. There was a short pause. Did they? No. Good, she said. Then we build the record. The record. That phrase steadied me more than any comfort could have. Nina came to the house that afternoon with a paralegal named Seth and a scanner small enough to fit in a handbag. Maggie sat beside me at the kitchen table, arms crossed, daring anyone to treat me like a confused old woman in my own home. Nina began with the trust. She read silently for several minutes, then looked up. Your husband was careful. He usually was. This house is protected. Blake cannot simply sell it, not without getting around several very deliberate safeguards. His guardianship petition is the first step toward doing exactly that. Hearing it said plainly did not shock me. That frightened me more than if it had. Some part of me had already known. Then we built the record. Nina requested my neurological evaluation and scheduled an independent capacity assessment. Maggie wrote a statement describing my daily routine, the pill calendar I had kept before Blake locked it away, the bills I had paid on time, the meals I cooked, the books I still read with sticky notes tucked between the pages. Seth helped me regain access to my bank account. Blake had changed the password, but he had not expected a woman with a stroke and a lawyer to know the phrase unauthorized access. The transactions made the room colder. 3 withdrawals from my checking account in 2 weeks. 1 payment to Blake's business credit card. 1 transfer labeled home safety repairs that had gone to a contractor I had never hired. And a consulting deposit from Hawthorne Development into Blake's business account, dated 2 days before the valuation visit. Nina did not react dramatically. She simply printed each page. "Evidence doesn't need volume," she said. "It needs order." Then Maggie remembered the kitchen camera. After Arthur died, she had insisted I install a small indoor security camera facing the back door because I sometimes forgot to lock it. I had protested at the time. Now, with Seth opening the app on my phone, I silently apologized to every sensible woman I had ever dismissed for worrying too much. The video was there, Blake standing over my kitchen table, Claire beside him, his voice clear enough to make Nina stop taking notes. "You're too weak to fight this." Then, a few seconds later, "By the time the court understands anything, Mom, this will already be handled." Nobody spoke after it played. Maggie put a hand over her mouth. Seth looked at the floor. Nina replayed it once, downloaded it, saved it in 3 places, and said, "That may be the moment he loses the room." The room. She meant the courtroom. But I thought of every room Blake had ever owned simply by walking into it with confidence. My kitchen, my hospital room, my bank account, my life. That evening he called 12 times. I did not answer. Claire texted once, "You're making a mistake. Judges don't like bitter old women." I forwarded it to Nina. Blake came by after dark and pounded on the front door hard enough to rattle the glass. "Mom, open the door. We need to talk." I stood in the hallway with my cane in one hand and my phone in the other. My thumb hovered over 911. Through the door I said, "Anything you need to say can go through my attorney." Silence. Then he laughed, low and ugly. "You don't even know what an attorney costs." For the first time in weeks I smiled. "No," I said, "but your father did." The pounding stopped. By Friday, Nina had filed our response. By Monday, Blake's attorney had received the trust documents. By Wednesday, the judge had ordered all parties to appear. The court date was set for April 17th. Blake thought that date would be the day I lost my home. I circled it on the calendar in red ink. For the first time since the stroke, my hand did not shake. The courthouse smelled like floor wax, old paper, and people trying not to cry. I arrived 30 minutes early because Arthur had always said if you're going to face something hard, never give it the advantage of making you rush. Nina walked beside me, one hand lightly near my elbow but never touching unless I asked. Maggie followed with a canvas tote full of printed copies. I had my cane in my left hand and Arthur's folder tucked against my ribs like a shield. Blake was already there. He stood near the courtroom doors in a navy suit I recognized because I had bought it for him 2 Christmases ago when he said he needed to look serious for investors. Claire stood beside him in a beige dress, scrolling through her phone with the bored irritation of someone waiting for a delay at the airport, not a hearing that could strip an elderly woman of her rights. When Blake saw me, his face changed into concern so quickly it almost impressed me. "Mom," he said, crossing the hall, "you don't have to do this." I stopped walking. He lowered his voice. "We can still work this out. Tell your attorney you were overwhelmed. I'll make sure the judge understands." There it was. The offer. Not peace. Surrender dressed up as mercy. "I understand everything," I said. His eyes flicked to Nina, then back to me. The softness drained away. "Don't embarrass yourself," he whispered. "You're too weak to fight this." For 1 second, the hallway disappeared and I was back in my kitchen, looking at the pencil marks on the pantry frame. Blake at 7, Blake at 10, Blake at 13. Then Nina opened the courtroom door. "Mrs. Whitaker," she said, "let's go make the record." The hearing room was smaller than I expected. No jury, no dramatic wooden witness box like television. Just a judge, 2 tables, a clerk, a court reporter, and enough silence to make every paper sound important. Judge Eleanor Hayes entered at 9 sharp. She was in her late 50s, with gray hair pulled back and reading glasses low on her nose. She did not look cruel. She looked like a woman who had heard every version of family love being used as a weapon. Blake's attorney spoke first. He described my stroke, my age, my recent confusion, my resistance to help. Blake sat with his head bowed at just the right angle. Then Blake testified. He said he loved me. He said this was painful. He said he had taken my keys because he was afraid I would crash. He said he had changed the bank password because scammers target older women. He said the house was becoming unsafe and that selling it might give me access to better care. He never said debt. He never said developer. He never said control. When his attorney asked what he wanted, Blake put one hand over his heart. I just want my mother protected. I looked down at Arthur's folder and felt nothing move inside me. No panic, no guilt, no old mother instinct rising to cover for him. That part of me had grown tired and sat down. Then Nina stood. She did not raise her voice. She did not accuse him of being a monster. She only asked questions in the calm, careful way of a woman setting bricks in a wall. Mr. Whitaker, when did you change your mother's bank password? Blake blinked. I don't remember exactly. Nina handed him a page. Would seeing the bank security notice help? He read it. March 3rd. 2 days after she came home from the hospital? Yes. Did she ask you to do that? I was acting under power of attorney. That was not my question. Blake's jaw tightened. No. Nina placed the next document on the projector. My bank statement appeared on the screen. Can you explain this transfer to your business credit card? Blake shifted. It was reimbursement. For what? Home safety improvements. Nina clicked again. Did those improvements include a payment to Hawthorne Development? Claire stopped scrolling. The judge looked up. Blake said, that was unrelated. Nina nodded as if she had expected that answer and placed an email on the screen. It was from Blake to a representative at Hawthorne. Subject, Whitaker property timeline. The room went so quiet I could hear the court reporter's keys. Nina read one line aloud. Once guardianship is approved, we can move fast before she changes her mind. Blake's face lost color. His attorney stood. Your Honor, context. Judge Hayes lifted one hand. Sit down. Ms. Alvarez may continue. Then Nina played the video. My kitchen filled the screen. There was my table, my cane against the chair, Blake leaning over me, his voice clear and unmistakable. You're too weak to fight this. Claire closed her eyes. By the time the court understands anything, Mom, this will already be handled. The video ended, but the words stayed in the room like smoke. Nina turned to the judge. Your Honor, Mrs. Whitaker's son has framed physical recovery as mental incompetence. He has taken control of her banking, restricted her movement, opened negotiations to sell her home, and attempted to convert his mother's medical event into a financial opportunity. Then she opened Arthur's folder. This is the Whitaker family trust. She laid it before the court like something sacred, and in a way it was. Not because of money. Because Arthur had used the last strength of his life to protect the part of mine he feared our son would try to steal. Nina explained the trust clearly. I had lifetime rights to the home. Blake had no authority to sell it. Any attempt to benefit from coercion or misuse of authority could trigger removal from future inheritance consideration. Blake stood up. That's not what Dad wanted. For the first time I spoke. Yes, it is. Every face turned toward me. My voice was still slower than before the stroke, but slow is not the same as unsure. Your Honor, I said, my son told you I am confused. I am not confused. I know my name. I know where I live. I know what happened to my body. And I know what my son tried to do while I was recovering. Blake whispered, Mom. I did not look at him. My body became weak, I said. My mind did not. Judge Hayes removed her glasses and looked at Blake for a long moment. Then she denied the guardianship petition. She revoked Blake's authority under the power of attorney pending investigation. She ordered him to return my keys, financial access, medical records, and any documents removed from my home. She referred the financial transfers for review. Blake's attorney began to object. The judge cut him off. Mr. Whitaker came before this court claiming protection. The record suggests control. Blake turned red. She's my mother, he said. Judge Hayes looked at him without blinking. Then you should have remembered she was also a person. That was the moment my son lost. Not the house, not the money, not the petition. He lost the story. And for a man like Blake, that was the one thing he could not afford. The first thing I did after the hearing was sit in Nina's car and cry so quietly that even Maggie, sitting in the back seat, pretended not to notice. It was not victory that broke me. Victory, I learned, is too clean a word for what it feels like when the person you raised tries to legally erase you and fails. What I felt was grief with paperwork attached, relief with bruises, freedom with the shape of my son's face still printed on it. Nina started the engine but did not pull away. "You did well," she said. I looked down at my right hand, still curled slightly in my lap. I hated him in there. "No," Maggie said from the back seat. "You hated what he did." I wanted that to be true because mothers are expected to love in a way that survives anything. But the truth is more complicated than that. I loved Blake. I loved the boy who once ran into the kitchen with muddy shoes and a scraped knee, crying for me like I was the only safe place in the world. I loved the child whose height I marked on the pantry frame. I loved the memory of him. But I no longer trusted the man he had become. That distinction saved me. By 5 o'clock, Blake had returned my keys in an envelope pushed through the mail slot. No note, no apology. Just the house key, the back door key, the car key, and the little brass key to the medication box he had placed on my counter, like I was a child who might poison herself by accident. Maggie stood beside me while I opened it. Inside were my orange bottles, lined up neatly, labels facing forward. I took them out one by one and put them back in the cabinet where they belonged. It was such a small thing. A woman returning her own medicine to her own shelf. And still my knees weakened. Control does not always look like chains. Sometimes it looks like someone moving your pills 6 inches out of reach and calling it love. The next week was a series of reversals. Nina filed to terminate the power of attorney formally. My bank restored my access and flagged Blake's transactions for review. My doctor's office removed him from my medical contact list. Hawthorne Development sent one polite email withdrawing interest in the property until family matters were resolved, which made Nina laugh for the first time since I had met her. "Developers are allergic to court records," she said. Blake was less polite. He called 23 times the first night. I did not answer. His voicemails moved through the usual seasons of a guilty man. First, anger. "You humiliated me in front of everyone." Then blame. "Claire pushed me. You know how she gets." Then self-pity. "My business is gone. The bank is calling. I was desperate." Then, finally, the closest thing to truth he could manage. "I didn't think you'd actually fight me." I saved that one. Not because I wanted to punish him forever. Because I knew myself. I knew there would be mornings when guilt came to his motherhood and sat at the foot of my bed. I knew there would be birthdays, holidays, quiet Sundays when I would wonder if I had been too hard, too cold, too willing to let my only child fall. So I kept his own voice nearby to remind me. He had not underestimated my strength. He had counted on my love being more useful than my dignity. 2 weeks after court, Claire left him. Maggie heard it from someone at the pharmacy, and I heard it from Blake himself in a voicemail that began with crying and ended with a request for money. The amount was smaller this time, $5,000, then 3, then anything you can spare. I sat at the kitchen table with Arthur's folder in front of me and wrote Blake a letter. Not a text, not an email, a letter. I wanted the words to move as slowly as my hand needed them to. "Blake, I am still your mother. That will never change. But I am no longer your bank, your excuse, your backup plan, or the woman you can frighten into silence. If you want a relationship with me, it will begin with accountability, not access. Do not come to my house without being invited. Do not contact my doctors, my bank, or my attorney. Do not ask me for money. I hope one day you become someone I can safely know again." Mom, I mailed it certified, then I drove myself to physical therapy. That drive mattered more than the courtroom. It was only 11 minutes through quiet suburban streets, past the elementary school where Blake had once performed as a tree in the spring play, past the grocery store where Arthur always bought the wrong kind of yogurt and insisted it tasted the same. My right hand rested uselessly near my thigh. My left hand held the wheel. I drove under the speed limit the whole way. When I parked, I put my forehead against the steering wheel and laughed until I cried. I was not healed, but I was moving. By summer, I could climb the porch steps without stopping. By fall, I could hold a coffee cup with both hands. Not perfectly, not every time, but enough. Maggie helped me repaint the pantry wall, but I left the doorframe untouched. The pencil marks stayed. Not as a shrine to Blake, but as proof that love had existed there before entitlement moved in and tried to rename itself concern. Arthur's roses bloomed late that year. I cut 3 stems and placed them in a jar on the kitchen table beside the steel box. I no longer kept the box hidden in the closet. Hidden things had nearly cost me my home. Now it sat on the shelf where anyone could see it, blue-gray, scratched, ugly, faithful. Blake did not come for Thanksgiving. He sent one text. "Are you really going to let me spend the holiday alone?" I read it while Maggie was in my kitchen burning the rolls and Nina was on speakerphone arguing that pumpkin pie was just wet bread with confidence. For a moment, the old ache opened, the one with his baby face inside it. Then I typed back, "I did not leave you alone. I left you responsible for yourself." He did not answer. That night, after everyone left, I walked to the pantry door and touched the highest pencil mark with my good hand. Blake, age 13. I whispered the thing I had not been able to say in court. "I loved you enough to raise you. I love myself enough not to be ruined by you." The house was quiet after that. Not empty. Quiet. There is a difference. My son said I was too weak to fight. He was wrong. I was only too tired to keep losing politely. And when the court date arrived, I did not need to shout. I did not need to beg. I did not even need him to be sorry. I only needed the truth in the room, and once it was there, standing became much easier.